Have you ever wondered what really happened to a person who lifted the axe in the Middle Ages, and what happened when he missed? Eyes. Because yes, they missed. And when steel didn't cut on the first strike, not only did the condemned scream, the crowd roared, the executioner sweated under the hood, and the nightmare began. Stay with me, because we're stepping into a job indispensable to medieval justice, and at the same time cursed by society. And here's something almost no one tells you. Executioners sometimes drank before starting, just to keep their hand from shaking. The Middle Ages, 5th to 15th centuries, weren't a right's paradise. Justice was flexible. Steal a loaf of bread, and you might lose a hand. Offend a noble, and your head could end up on a pike. Who carried out those sentences? The executioner, the dirty but essential gear in a machine that wasn't always fair. Almost nobody wanted the post, but someone had to do it. Imagine waking up knowing your day will be beheading, hanging, or branding skin with red-hot iron. There's no, I'm taking the day off. Rain or snow, axe in hand. And forget the movie myth. Decapitation wasn't clean, with dull axes, because no one invested in an executioner's tools. One blow often was enough. The chilling scene, the execution of Margaret Pole, Countess of Salisbury, in 1541. 11 strikes. 11. The condemned screaming, the crowd booing, the executioner trembling, and with every miss his own danger rose. Think hanging was easier? Not really. In many medieval gallows, death came by slow asphyxiation, minutes of agonizing struggle. The rope could snap, the knot could fail, and the executioner had to improvise in front of a packed square. And it didn't stop there. The executioner was often the official torturer, handling the rack to stretch bodies until they tore, the garrote to squeeze necks. This demanded strength, technique, and a mental armor most people didn't have. But the worst wasn't the blood. It was the social price. The executioner was a pariah. He lived on the outskirts, isolated. Many considered him impure. In places like medieval France, he couldn't enter certain churches or markets. His children inherited the stigma. Doors closed to marriage, schooling, and work. How do you date when your intro sounds like, "Hi, I might have hanged your cousin last week," and the pay didn't make up for it? Sometimes serving a noble or a big city meant decent money. More often, not. They relied on tips from the condemned or their families to ensure a quick death. Yes, people bribed the executioner to avoid extra suffering. If there was no money, the executioner went home empty-handed and blood-stained. When executions were scarce, they had to survive as butchers, knackers, or trash collectors, jobs that deepened the dirty people label society already pinned on them. And as if the pressure weren't enough, imagine executing someone you know, or someone you know is innocent. Medieval justice could run on rumors, envy, and power plays. The executioner didn't question. He complied. Many drank beforehand. No therapy, no debrief. Wine was a friend. Some secretly prayed for the souls they ended. But guilt rarely stayed quiet. Then there was a crowd. Executions as a macabre show. Rotten tomatoes, insults, stones. And if the executioner botched it, the mob could turn on him. One mistake, and the instrument of justice became the villain. Tools? Bad. Dull axes. Faulty ropes. Gallows thrown together in a rush. Sometimes the executioner had to twist his own rope or sharpen the axe himself. No medieval support desk. If the blade felt like a butter knife, he had to improvise with disastrous results. And still, there were perks. Keeping belongings of the executed, selling hair or even blood, which people believe had healing powers. Extra income, and one more reason to see them as morally repulsive. Handling body parts right after killing someone didn't cleanse their image. To top it off, the trade was often hereditary. If your father was an executioner, you were too. Elsewhere, officials offered the job to criminals to spare their lives. From about to lose your head to being the one who cuts it off. A second chance? Not really. More like a punishment disguised as work. You inherited the job and the stigma. If this descent into the medieval underworld is gripping you, subscribe and ring the bell. What's next explains why this job killed people on the inside, even those who did it. Let's talk about occupational hazards, The kind that made this job a slow death sentence of its own, with no gloves, no disinfectants, and barely any concept of hygiene. Every drop of blood, every open wound, every splintered bone was a gamble with fate. Cuts were common. Infections were almost guaranteed. And remember, this was a world before penicillin, before anyone even knew what bacteria were. One scratch from a rusted blade could turn into a fever that melted your body from the inside out. Imagine standing on the scaffold, your hand sticky with blood that isn't yours, knowing that even the smallest nick could mean your end. The executioner's tools, the ropes, the axes, the shackles, were never cleaned properly. Each instrument carried traces of the condemned before a grim inheritance passed from body to body. And then there was the political danger. One wrong gesture, one swing perceived as disrespectful, could offend a noble or a king. If they called your execution dishonorable or clumsy, you didn't just lose your job, you could lose your head. There are records of executioners who were forced to die by their own axe, executed on the same scaffold they built for others. A terrifying irony. Punish for imperfection in a profession where perfection was impossible. But what truly destroyed them wasn't just a physical risk. It was emotional isolation. Imagine being a man or a woman who carries death on their shoulders every single day, yet has no one to talk to about it. The executioner was a hand of justice, but he was also human. He felt the trembling of those about to die. He saw their tears. Some executioners whispered prayers for the condemned before the fatal blow. Others begged forgiveness under their breath as they swung the axe. There was never time to process anything. There was always another one waiting. The guilt piled up like invisible corpses, crushing the mind beneath its weight. Today, we call it trauma, anxiety, or depression. Back then, they just called it the curse of the executioner. And if you think the condemned went quietly, think again. Some cursed the executioner until their last breath. Others screamed, begged for mercy, or tried to run. Imagine trying to adjust the rope while someone spits in your face or pleads for their life, promising anything, gold, land, forgiveness, in exchange for a few more seconds. Every execution was a storm of emotions: fear, hatred, guilt, and blood. If the prisoner was important, like a noble or a priest, the pressure was unbearable. A single mistake could mean the wrath of the powerful. And yes, bribes happen all the time. A small pouch of coins slipped discreetly, a whispered promise of, make it quick. But if the authorities found out, the executioner's neck replaced the prisoners on the block. And here's something few people know. Not all executioners were men. History records a handful of female executioners, called upon especially to execute other women when male contact was considered improper. They faced the same disgust, fear, and hatred as their male counterparts. Perhaps even more. Imagine living in a world where simply being a woman was already a disadvantage, and then being branded as the one who brings death. They were erased from most chronicles, but their existence whispers to the margins of old texts, proof that the trade didn't discriminate in suffering. So, how did someone even learn this craft? No schools. No mentors willing to advertise. It was a family business of blood, passed from father to son, generation after generation. Apprentices began as children, watching from behind wooden beams while their fathers carried out executions. They learned how to tie the noose, how to lift the axe, how to ignore the screams. They prepared ropes, cleaned the tools, and waited for the day their own hands would have to strike. There were no rehearsals, no second chances. Sometimes, practice meant hacking at animal carcasses or swinging at logs to test precision. And when that first real moment came, when flesh replaced wood, it wasn't strength that mattered. It was control. If your hands trembled, the crowd would notice. If you missed, the condemned would scream. And once that sound entered your ears, it never truly left. The best executioners studied anatomy, in the crude medieval way, learning which vertebra to target for a swift death, which angle made the head fall cleanly. A few developed such skill they could decapitate with a single stroke, earning the twisted respect of the townsfolk. Feared, yet secretly admired for their precision. But those were rare exceptions. Most lived and died trying to find that perfect swing. Now, about the uniform. Forget Hollywood's neat black hood. It wasn't universal. In many regions, executioners worked barefaced, their identities known to all, which made normal life impossible. Others wore leather masks or heavy hoods to hide their faces. Imagine breathing through thick fabric under the blazing sun, vision narrowed, sweat trickling down as 1,000 eyes watch you. The smell of blood fills your nostrils, your heart pounds, and still, you must raise the axe without hesitation. Their clothes were rarely clean, stained with blood, sweat, and worse. In some cities, they were forced to wear red or black garments so the public could instantly recognize them. A walking reminder of death. Everywhere they went, people stepped aside. Mothers pulled children closer. The executioner was both necessary and untouchable. And the stench. The scaffold was a theater of decay, blood pooling on old wood, sweat mixing with fear, and the sharp metallic scent of iron filling the air. On hot summer days, it became unbearable. The condemned often lost control of their bodies in the final moments, and the executioner had to stand in the middle of it all. No way to escape. There were no perfumes strong enough, no herbs potent enough to drown it out. The schedule? Forget the idea of working hours. Justice never slept. Executions would be ordered at dawn, midnight, or back-to-back during political purges or witch trials. Hours upon hours of death, repetition, and screams. And when the gallows were quiet, the executioner still needed to eat. So he turned to whatever work he could find. Butchering animals, disposing of corpses, cleaning latrines, or skinning carcasses at the local market. Jobs that paid just enough to survive, but ensured he'd never be clean in anyone's eyes again. He was a shadow of society, needed, hated, and endlessly trapped in a circle of blood he could never escape. If this dark glimpse into medieval justice is keeping your eyes glued to the screen, hit subscribe, because what's coming next will shake you. There were actual codes of conduct executioners had to follow, and, shockingly, sometimes they even acted as healers. It's hard to believe, but even this gruesome craft had rules. Yes, in many parts of Europe, being an executioner came with a kind of manual for morality, written by the same society that despised them. In the Holy Roman Empire, there were official codes of conduct. They stated that an executioner should never perform his duty drunk, that his tools must be sharp and clean, and that the condemned must be allowed to speak a final prayer or say last words before dying. On parchment, it almost sounded honorable, but in practice, it depended entirely on the executioner's mood and the temper of the crowd. Picture it, thousands of eyes watching. If the mob demanded pain, the executioner was forced to deliver cruelty. If they wanted a quick death, he had to grant mercy. His job wasn't just killing, it was performance. He had to read the crowd like a twisted entertainer, balancing fear and fascination. One mistake, one misplaced swing, and that same audience could turn into a mob ready to stone him to death. And yet, among all the darkness, there was an unexpected twist. Executioners sometimes became healers. Sounds impossible, right? But in a world where medical knowledge was primitive, the executioner was one of the few people who truly understood the human body, not from books, but from brutal experience. They knew how skin tore, how joints moved, where arteries pulsed. That knowledge gave them a strange, grim authority. In many towns, desperate peasants visited the executioner not to die, but to be saved. He would set broken bones, drain infections, pull teeth, or stitch wounds, often using the same hands that had taken lives hours earlier. Some even brewed potions and remedies believed to ward off illness, sold quietly to the superstitious and the desperate. Imagine the paradox. In the morning, he kills. In the afternoon, he heals. And by sunset, he returns to a house no one dares to visit. But being a healer didn't cleanse his reputation. If a patient died, villagers accused him of witchcraft or malice, and the same people who had begged for his help would turn on him in fury. There was no redemption for the hand of the hangman. Culturally, executioners became symbols, necessary monsters that haunted stories, poems, and songs. In medieval folklore, they were portrayed as half-human demons, cursed by God, carrying the sins of others. Children whispered that touching an executioner brought bad luck for 7 years. Some even believed their shadow could blight crops or spoil milk. And yet, despite the superstition, everyone secretly needed them. No king, no lord, no judge could rule without one. They were the invisible engine of justice, and everyone knew it, a paradox that made them both feared and indispensable. But not every executioner lived in anonymity. Some, like England's infamous Jack Ketch, achieved a kind of macabre fame, known for his disastrous executions and his trembling hand. Ketch became the butt of jokes, his name forever linked with botched beheadings. He even appeared in political cartoons of the era, part executioner, part clown. Imagine that. The man chosen to uphold justice reduced to a figure of mockery. And yet, others admired his cold efficiency. The crowd hated him but also couldn't look away. That was the executioner's curse, to be both repulsive and fascinating, like fire. Everyone knows it burns, yet everyone stares. Still, for most, the fame never came. They lived and died in silence, buried outside the churchyard, their graves unmarked. Even their families carried the stain. Children of executioners couldn't marry freely. Merchants refused them service. Priests denied them blessings. Their legacy was loneliness, passed down through generations like a family heirloom made of shame. But let's not forget, their job was also a mirror of their time. The executioner wasn't just one man. He was the embodiment of the system itself, a system that punished in public to keep people afraid, obedient, and silent. Every swing of the axe, every creak of the rope, every scream that echoed to the square reminded people who held power. He was both the tool and the warning. And yet, beneath the hood, behind the stigma, there was still a human heart. A man who probably dreamed of peace. A woman who maybe wanted to bake bread instead of burying bodies. They didn't choose this path. It was given to them, by birth, by blood, or by the cruel irony of survival. When you look back now, centuries later, it's tempting to think of them as monsters. But maybe they were simply the price of civilization, paid in silence. So, the next time you complain about your boss or a long day at the office, picture that executioner sharpening his blade under a gray sky, rain soaking through his hood, a crowd screaming for blood, and a condemned soul trembling at his feet. He lifts the axe, and for one frozen moment, time stops. The world holds its breath. And then the blade falls. The crowd cheers. The work is done. But in the executioner's mind, the sound of that scream never leaves. He walks home alone, through empty streets, unseen but known by all. The man everyone needed and no one wanted. If this journey through the shadows of the Middle Ages fascinated you, hit subscribe and join us. Because history isn't just about kings and castles. It's about the people who carried the darkness so others could live in the light.